Within, for decades, Israel has relied on the unwavering support of powerful Western allies, particularly the United States, to shield itself from international scrutiny. This alliance helped Israel maintain its military dominance, economic growth, and diplomatic immunity. However, this global power structure is beginning to shift. Social media, independent journalism from within, and the democratization of information are breaking the monopoly of traditional narratives. With every missile strike, every demolished hospital, and every displaced family, the global conscience is awakening. Within, the carefully constructed image of Israel as a besieged democracy is cracking under the weight of undeniable atrocities. Within, the world is watching more closely now, and what it sees is disturbing. The collapse hasn't just begun. It's already underway, but from within, and it's being fueled not by tan rockets, but by voices, images, and truths that can no longer be suppressed. In cities from New York to London, Sydney to Cape Town, protests swell with masses demanding justice for Palestine. What was once a fringe movement has become mainstream. University campuses, cultural icons, and even political figures are speaking out against Israeli policies. As the death toll rises, public sentiment in Western nations shifts dramatically. Israel can no longer count on blind support from abroad. The era of unchallenged military operations in Gaza and the West Bank is fading. People are connecting the dots. Apartheid walls, illegal settlements, disproportionate violence, and they are calling it what it is, from within. The world is no longer divided into those who know and those who don't. Now it's between those who act and those who stay silent. Every rally, every boycott, every viral post chips away at Israel's moral high ground, and what remains is a country increasingly isolated. But from within, Israel's leadership is grappling with an existential crisis, though they may not admit it publicly. Prime ministerial speeches remain defiant, but behind closed doors there is panic. The once ironclad alliance with the US is showing cracks. Younger generations of American voters, including Jewish Americans, are questioning the $3.8 billion in annual aid and the diplomatic protection Israel enjoys. Congressional resistance is rising. Israel's traditional defense, that criticism equals anti-Semitism, is losing power. Within, critics are drawing clear lines between legitimate Jewish identity and the policies of a government accused of systemic oppression. From within, the loss of narrative control is devastating. When even some Holocaust survivors and descendants call out Israel's actions, from within the moral landscape shifts. The collapse is not just military or economic, it's ideological. A loss of legitimacy is harder to recover from than a lost war, and that's exactly what Israel is facing today. Economically, Israel faces increasing threats of isolation. The boycott, divestment, sanctions BDS movement is gaining momentum. International companies are rethinking contracts. Cultural and academic boycotts grow stronger. Israeli tech companies, long the jewel of its economy, are facing scrutiny and reluctance from global investors. Even within Israel, economic protests are mounting. As military campaigns drain resources and international support wanes, economic anxiety intensifies. The illusion of Israel as a prosperous startup nation is fading. Consumers, investors within, and governments are reevaluating their ties. Arab nations that once flirted with normalization are walking back commitments. But from within, as Israel's foreign reserves shrink and inflation bites, the state's future becomes more precarious. Economic collapse doesn't happen overnight. It erodes gradually, and the erosion is visible now like a dam beginning to crack. The consequences are not years away. They're already here, knocking on the doors of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The military, but from within, once considered untouchable, is no longer above global accountability. Investigative journalism and whistleblowers are exposing war crimes. The use of banned weapons, indiscriminate bombings within, and civilian casualties are no longer just allegations. They're documented realities. International courts are under pressure to act. For the first time, Israeli generals fear arrest when traveling abroad. The narrative, self-defense, is not holding under legal scrutiny. Israel, a state created in response to global injustice within, now finds itself accused of perpetrating it. This shift marks a seismic change in global relations. Military might cannot hide forever behind rhetoric. As the International Criminal Court and UN bodies pursue investigations, Israel finds itself in unfamiliar territory. As the accused, not the victim. Global norms are evolving, and impunity is no longer guaranteed. This reckoning is not just a threat, but from within, it's already unraveling the myth of invincibility that once defined the Israeli Defense Forces. The psychological toll within Israel is growing. Once a society unified by fear and nationalism, cracks are emerging from within. Young Israelis are refusing conscription, questioning their role in an occupation that many now view as immoral. But from within, protests against the government's actions are growing louder, not just from Palestinians, but from Israeli Jews themselves. The Zionist dream, long tied to ideals of safety and sovereignty, is being reevaluated by the very people it was meant to serve. As public trust in institutions falters, a sense of existential dread permeates daily life. Fear of rockets is now compounded by fear of collapse, political, economic, and social. When the youth of a nation question its foundations, that nation must confront uncomfortable truths. Israel is beginning to do so, and the process is painful. The internal collapse, driven by disillusionment and dissent, is as dangerous as any external threat. Diplomatically, Israel's standing is weakening. Once protected by Western vetoes at the UN, the tide is turning. More nations are voting in favor of resolutions condemning Israeli actions. Latin America, Africa, and much of Asia are aligning against Israeli aggression. Some nations are even severing diplomatic ties entirely. European governments, once cautious, now face pressure from their own citizens to act decisively. The diplomatic isolation is palpable. Even the Abraham Accords, once hailed as a breakthrough, are proving fragile. With each new conflict, support from Arab signatories wavers. Israel's embassy staff face protests across continents. Political leaders, wary of domestic backlash, are rethinking alliances. Israel's position at the global table is no longer secure. The notion of a respected democratic state is being replaced by one of a rogue actor. In the arena of international diplomacy, reputations matter, and Israel's is in freefall. Culturally, the tide has turned. Artists, musicians, writers, and filmmakers are taking a stand. Prominent figures refuse to perform in Israel or participate in state-sponsored events. Film festivals reject Israeli funding. Music tours are cancelled in protest. Cultural boycotts may seem symbolic from within, but they shape public opinion in powerful ways. The soft power Israel once wielded through art and innovation is waning. No longer seen as a beacon of democracy and resilience, it is increasingly perceived as an apartheid state. These perceptions trickle into academia, media, and public consciousness. As culture shifts, so does the moral compass of nations from within. When art stops celebrating a country, when artists distance themselves, that nation loses influence in ways armies cannot counter. Israel is facing not just political or military challenges, but a cultural divorce. The world is rejecting the narrative it once accepted, and that rejection is as loud as bombs. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has become impossible to ignore. Children pulled from rubble, hospitals overwhelmed, families displaced. These images haunt the global psyche. No longer filtered through government press releases, the truth reaches people raw and unmediated. Human rights organizations, including Israeli ones, are documenting systematic abuses. From within, the blockade, the collective punishment, the disproportionate use of force. These are now front-page issues. Western governments struggle to defend the indefensible. Sympathy is shifting. While Israeli civilians certainly suffer, the imbalance in suffering is too vast to ignore. The humanitarian narrative is collapsing on Israel's side. Even in conflict, from within proportionality matters. The world no longer sees two equal sides, it sees an occupier and the occupied. This distinction is critical. It reframes the debate from security to justice, from conflict to colonization. But from within, the change is not subtle, it is fundamental, and it reshapes the future of international engagement. But from within, legal accountability is no longer a far-off dream for Palestinian advocates. War crime investigations are not only ongoing, they are gaining legitimacy. The ICC, long criticized for its inaction, is under intense global pressure to prosecute Israeli officials. European courts have begun issuing warnings about jurisdiction. From within, legal scholars, once cautious, now speak openly about the possibility of accountability. For decades, legal action seemed unlikely due to geopolitical shields, but these shields are eroding. The law is slow, but it is relentless. As evidence mounts and testimonies surface, the case grows stronger. Israel's leaders can no longer travel freely without risk. The fear of legal consequences now shapes policy discussions in Tel Aviv. Accountability is no longer a theoretical threat. It is a looming reality. If Israel's collapse comes, but from within, it will not just be on the battlefield or the market floor. It will be in courtrooms around the world, where justice demands reckoning. Media coverage has undergone a radical transformation. Gone are the days when Israeli perspectives dominated headlines without challenge. Independent journalists, citizen reporters, and social media activists now compete with mainstream outlets to tell the full story. Videos of airstrikes, child casualties, and settler violence flood the digital space within seconds. Traditional media is forced to respond or risk irrelevance. From within, even outlets historically sympathetic to Israel are facing internal revolts from staff who demand balanced reporting. The language is shifting too. Terms like apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and colonialism are no longer taboo. Media is not merely reflecting the changing tide, it is accelerating it. Information is power, and that power is no longer monopolized. Israel is losing the information war, and with it, the ability to control how the world sees its actions. In the battle for narrative, the side with truth often wins, even if it takes time. As each of these factors converge, diplomatic isolation, economic decline, military delegitimization, legal pressure, and cultural rejection, a pattern emerges. Israel's position on the global stage is becoming untenable from within. This collapse is not a singular event, but a convergence of failures that erode the foundation of its statecraft. From within, nations do not fall because of one war or one policy. They fall because they lose the world's trust. The process has already begun. It is visible in the streets, in parliaments, in courtrooms, and online. Israel's allies are hesitating, its critics are growing louder, and its people are divided. The world is turning, and it's turning fast. What once seemed like eternal support is becoming conditional, and those conditions are not being met. Israel stands at a crossroads. To change course may yet offer redemption. But if the current path continues from within, history may remember this as the beginning of the fall.